and we're going to go back into history and we're going to learn a little bit about Jerusalem and Palestine. Jerusalem, which means possession of peace, sacred city and well-known capital of Palestine during Bible times. The earliest name for Jerusalem was Urushalem, Salem, of which Melchizedek was king, was a natural abbreviation for Jerusalem and probably referred to the city. Thus, Jerusalem appears in the Bible as early as the time of Abraham, although the city had probably been inhabited for centuries before that time. Interesting. The city of Jerusalem is mentioned directly in the Bible for the first time during the struggle of Joshua and the Israelites to take the land from Canaan. Joshua 10:1-4. Their efforts to take the city were unsuccessful, although the areas surrounding the city were taken and the land was given to the tribe of Judah. Still remaining in the fortress of the city itself were the Jebusites. Thus, the city was called Jebus, Jerusalem under David. After the death of Saul, the first king of the United Kingdom of the Hebrew people, David was named the new king of Israel. One of his efforts was to unite the tribes of the north and south by capturing Jerusalem from the Jebusites, making the city a political and religious capital of the kingdom. Chronicles 11:4-9. It was David who gave the city the name of Jerusalem. So David named the city. That's interesting. Because it was captured during his reign, Jerusalem also became known as the city of David. The city is also referred to in the Bible. So in the Bible, you would see it referred to as the city of David. David built a palace in the section of Jerusalem that served previously as the Jebusite stronghold. This section, situated at the highest section of the city, is frequently referred to as Mount Zion. It was it was easily defended from invaders. So the location was probably selected because it was easily defended from invaders. Jerusalem had little to recommend it as a capital city when compared to the other major cities of the ancient world. It was an inland city, not situated near a seaport. Moreover, it was near the major trade routes used during the time. Why, then, did David select Jerusalem as the capital of this nation? The reasons were twofold. First, Jerusalem was certainly located between the northern and southern tribes. Thus, it was geographically convenient for the nation. The central location of the capital city tended to unite the people into one kingdom. Secondly, the topography of the city, which made it easy to defend. Jerusalem was situated on a hill. The eastern and western side of the cities consisted of valleys made that invasion of opposing forces difficult. The southern portion consisted of ravines that made the attack from the position unwise. The point from which to attack Jerusalem was the north, in which the highest elevation of any portion of the city. It was the position that attacks on the city were made for years following the establishment of Jerusalem as the capital. David also made Jerusalem the religious capital of the nation. He moved the Ark of the Covenant, which has been kept at Kirjath Jearim. So it's probably Kirhath Harim to Jerusalem. Then David proceeded to build a tabernacle in which the ark was placed. One of his desires was to build a temple in the capital city, but was prevented from completing his task. Then prophet Nathan instructed him that God did not want him to build the temple because his hands had been involved in so much bloodshed. Chronicles 17:1. David did make preparation for the building of the temple, however, leaving the actual building task to Solomon, his son and successor. Jerusalem under Solomon. The glory of Jerusalem began under David, reached its greatest heights under Solomon. Solomon proceeded to construct the temple about which David had dreamed. He also extended the borders of the city to the new limits. Because the surrounding nations were engaged in eternal strife, Jerusalem was spared from the invasions of opposing forces during Solomon's administration. After completing the temple, Solomon built a palace complex, a series of 5 structures. These other buildings were the House of Forest of Lebanon. An assembly hall, and a storage place for arms, an anteroom for the throne, where distinguished guests were received, The throne room, an ornately carved enclosure that covered the throne, which was carved ivory inlaid with gold. The king's palace, which was large so as to hold the king's family, and residence for Solomon's Egyptian wives, which adjoined the king's palace. Solomon also planted vineyards, orchards, and gardens that contained all types of trees and shrubs, these watered by streams and pools that flowed through the complex. Unfortunately, the splendor came to an end with the death of Solomon around 922 BC. The division of Hebrew kingdom into two separate nations after Solomon's reign resulted in the relapse of Jerusalem to the status of a minor city. We have a Jerusalem under siege period. After the death of Solomon, the division that occurred in the kingdom resulted in the 10 northern tribes establishing their own capital. First Shechem, and later Samaria. The southern tribes, consisting of Judah and Benjamin, retained Jerusalem as the capital. Although separated politically from Jerusalem, the northern tribes continued their allegiance to the holy city by occasionally coming there for worship. We're going to kind of skip forward all the problems, and then we're going to go to the restoration. For more than half a century, the Hebrews remained captives in Babylon, and their beloved Jerusalem lay in ruins. But this changed when Cyrus, king of Persia, defeated the Babylonians. He allowed Jewish captives to return to Jerusalem to restore the city. Zerubbabel was the leader of a group that left Babylon in 537 BC to return to Jerusalem and build the temple. After a period of about 20 years, the temple was restored, and although it was not as lavish as Solomon's, the real temple had been. That was after the captivity where we get Daniel and everybody being in Babylon. An interesting fact is Jesus had prophesied in Matthew 23 the city of Jerusalem was completely destroyed in AD 70. The temple was destroyed, and the high priesthood and the Sanhedrin were abolished. Eventually, a Roman city was erected on the site, and Jerusalem was regarded as forbidden ground for the Jews. Wow, now we get to modern Jerusalem. In 1919, under a ruling by British officials in Palestine, Jerusalem recognized its status as a capital city. During the following 3 decades, numerous Jews whose ancestors had been barred from the city settled around Jerusalem. A new city whose population was predominantly Jewish was constructed west of the site of the old city. Following the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 and 49, the new city allotted to the Jews, which the old city remained in Muslim hands. Less than 2 decades later, as a result of what has become known as the Six-Day War, the old city and the surrounding countryside were captured by Israel. It had remained occupied by the descendants of the biblical Israelites until the present day. Jerusalem is considered a holy city not only by the Jews and the Christians, but also Muslims. The book of Revelation speaks of New Jerusalem. This is not to be understood as an actual geographical location, but as a heavenly city fashioned by God himself for those who are known as and his people. What's wild about this book, there's actually more about the history of Palestine in here than Jerusalem, but that's because Jerusalem was a city while Palestine encompassed such a big area, I believe. New Jerusalem. So the Holy Scribe, this is when we get to biblical, everything was biblical, but New Jerusalem, the holy city described by John in Revelation 21 through 22, God's perfect and eternal order of the future. This New Jerusalem is not built by human hands. It is a heavenly city, one and provided by God himself. The New Jerusalem of the Garden of Eden symbolizes of righteousness, peace, and prosperity, are dwelling places of God, Christ, and the church. John saw no temple in Jerusalem, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. In the book of Revelation, John draws graphic contrast between the harlot city called Babylon and the Great, Revelation 14:8, 16:19, 17:1, 18:24, the earthly and temporal city of man, and the New Jerusalem, Revelation 21:2 through 22:5, the heavenly and eternal city of God. John identifies the great city, the holy Jerusalem, Revelation 21:10, as a church, which he calls the bride, the Lamb's wife.